Thank you very much for this very important film you made, Fredrik and Leilani. First, a few questions, and then you can have questions too. I think you have to raise your voice because we are in a big venue, but that will work out. First question, of course, what made you decide to make the movie? You live in Malmö, Sweden. Was it something you saw in your own city too?
Well, I think this is something everybody's been talking about for years about, you know, I mean, I was at a cafe here in Amsterdam yesterday. People were talking about housing prices and the table beside it. So it has been on for a long time, but obviously it was something new. I could feel that was something new happening around the world, and I wanted to find out. So and you know, I travel a lot as a filmmaker, so I visit a lot of continents and cities. And I also understood that if you want to tell a story like this, you should actually zoom up from the local level, the national level, because the national level contains a lot of history, a lot of name dropping, a lot of institutions, and then it becomes housing politics, which is really boring, you know.
Yeah.
So it's so by zooming up, maybe we can see a pattern, and then a simple question might also be able to get a simple answer, which I think we have. It's not so complicated. They want us to think that finance is complicated.
Yes.
But it's not.
And I agree with that, because we see you fight against these huge companies which are so huge we even can't imagine, but you say it's in fact not that complex. So can you explain that probably?
Explain whether it's complicated
that is not,
or not?
Yeah, whether it's or not. It seems to be very, very complicated.
I think the business model that's going on is very uncomplicated. Buy cheap, do modest renovations, raise the rents, people can't afford it, they get evicted. That's pretty straightforward.
It's very, yeah.
Uber capitalist model, so in that way it's not complicated. I agree with Fredrik.
Yeah.
And the other level of what you also have here in Amsterdam is this kind of the big influx of money. It's mainly money laundering. So you want to park your money, so you're buying properties for too much money, because the more money you pay, the more money you can hide. That's what this story from Saviano is so important in the film.
Of course, and as an independent expert also, because that's the main thing, you're independent. That's, I think, very important to emphasize. Is that, but we're talking about human rights, but in the end we see a kind of happy ending. In let's say people talk about each other with it, but on the other hand you see the company refuses to see you, and they just go on. So I was a little bit confused about it, because I was not very optimistic after seeing this movie. Are you? You have to, because you do this fight.
I don't have to be optimistic, I suppose. Well, of course, things have developed since the film finished, and I think the film and the work that I've been doing, and many on the ground in cities around the world, I think the conversation has changed entirely in a very short period of time. I think we're having these conversations that we weren't having even 1 year ago. And so in that way, I feel quite optimistic when I see what's happening in different cities globally, and the increasing awareness and push is really helping with that. I feel some optimism. Where I think things are complicated, to just go back to that question, is how we're really going to make a difference on a global scale. That's complicated to me as an advocate and a strategist. I think that's why I started the shift, because it's not for me alone to figure out all these complications.
No, but it's of course about awareness in the beginning. The awareness is everywhere now, I guess. Yes?
No, but I think every month we read in a newspaper all over the world some kind of the prices are going up, the prices are going down, like the market percentages. And it's like almost like a weather reporting. So we are kind of taught that housing, our homes, is a part of some kind of natural phenomena. The prices are going up. It's totally natural. And what we have to understand that this is a man-made problem. And the man-made problems can be changed. We have to believe that. So I think that's now when mayors are coming together, countries are taking new legislation. to find a way to keep this capital away. I mean, New Zealand now they have banned foreign investments. Berlin is taking a 5-year free rent cap right now. They're freezing the rents for 5 years. Portugal has a new legislation, human rights based, suggested by Leilani. Canada has it also. It happened what she did here. So the answer is politics. The answer is legislation, regulation, and I think it's time for it. And that's, I mean, Joseph Stiglitz here is a Nobel Prize winner of economy. And I mean, it states it's very clear. You know, you can make a lot of money by destroying the planet, but there's something wrong with it. Yes. And you can make a lot of money by pushing people out of their city, out of their homes, but it's something wrong with it. And it's now time for us, all of us, to stand up. And I think the change that Leilani is doing, it's a change of language. We have been saying housing market, housing market, housing market. She says housing human rights, housing human rights.
It's about people and not about...
Yeah, but it's also about all of us to change the language. They take control of the language, the explanation models. Most journalists, most politicians have bought into their ways of explaining why it's so fucked, you know? And they say there is a lack, we should build more, it's a lack of housing. There might not be a lack of housing. There's a lack of affordable housing. There's a lot of empty houses because they don't care about people live in them. You know?
I'd like to ask Zef Hemel, the professor who knows a lot about our city here in Amsterdam, also for you in the audience, because most of you live in the city, I guess. How do you see that? What did you think about the situation in Amsterdam? Is it that serious like the cities we saw in the movie?
I think it's pretty serious, yes. As you can see, all the people coming on Sunday morning, yeah, for sure. And we all know that we are in the middle of a kind of real estate bubble, especially here in Amsterdam. So when you see this new ranking of USB, the Global City Bubble Index, it really does exist. It's Amsterdam is in the top 3 at this moment. It's number 3. So just behind Toronto and Munich. So this is exceptional what is happening now in this city, for sure.
And is there a solution for that?
Well, there is no easy solution, but it's for sure we have to act in one way or the other. So over the last half year, I was working on the inner city of Amsterdam. So the mayor asked me, and of course I was in the middle of this this problem. It's one of the problems, of course, of the inner city, this real estate bubble. So the last advice in my vision to the mayor is to start a think tank of what will gonna happen if there comes a new financial crisis. We should be prepared for that, at least. Because it might even get worse if we do not act. But of course, this is not enough. And well, as you can see, at this very moment, City Council is very active in this domain and tries everything to do to stop this development. So I think the level of awareness in Amsterdam is quite high, right? And I would almost say that also our mayor is quite activistic in this respect.
Like the mayor of Barcelona, who became, in a way, your companion. Yeah. But is that enough? I mean, when there is awareness, we can see a company like Blackstone came into the Amsterdam market and they bought, I think, about 600 houses now, and they're still buying all the time. How can we stop that?
Well, I don't think it's not enough, and it's not enough just for mayors, because mayors, they're important and they're really feeling the stress and the pressure of the housing market, but they have very limited power in most places. National level governments have to start getting involved in this in a meaningful way. We've seen recently the government of Denmark becoming really engaged in this issue, and they've made it clear that actors like Blackstone are welcome into their country if they abide by the human rights obligations of the country. So they have to play by human rights rules. And you know, the Minister of Housing said that very clearly, and it's part of their platform. So I think we need governments from around the world to start taking a real stand. I did see recently in the Financial Times a really interesting article about a sort of change to capitalism, where some really big financial actors have started to even question their own moral scheme. And that's what we need. We need that kind of internal reflection, but we need governments, in my opinion, national level governments, to really step forward and say, we have human rights obligations. This is undermining our human rights obligation because we have an obligation to ensure everyone has access to affordable housing. In that way, it's that simple.
This Wednesday, in a few days, we're going to show the film in the Swedish Parliament. We're going to meet with the housing minister and a lot of parliamentarians. So we're invited by parliamentarians. So this is something that is now happening, that politicians are waking up, and it's really cool that the mayor of Amsterdam is there. But what I've seen is that it's a very late wake up.
Yes.
Because for a long time, this was all about protecting the banks from the financial crisis, and doing that, they really destroyed our market. Because after the financial crisis, we went from having national landlords to global landlords. So it's a very new phenomenon. Blackstone didn't own a single apartment 2011. That's when they entered. Can you say it's 8 years? They're the biggest on the planet.
Yeah.
They are the biggest landlord on the planet. So their access to money is extreme, because it's not their own money. It's probably your pension money, your and mine. So we should all go back, and you should ask your banks, your funds, do they have shares in Blackstone or these kind of companies? So I think that's also a way of fighting back. It's like, if we can fight, we can divest money from coal and oil investments, we can also divest immoral housing investments.
So we have all the responsibility, Mr. Hemel.
Well, I was studying now Toronto, what they did, because they were in this top 3 at number 1. So they introduced a tax of 15% on foreign real estate investments in the city. I don't know.
You're laughing, so.
Yeah. You should know more about it. But anyway, they did something really. I think it was a brave thing to do.
Did it work out? Because I'm not sure.
Well, with all of the foreign taxes, in the case of New Zealand that Fredrik mentioned, the foreign tax works because 40 to 50% of their homes were being purchased by foreign investors. But in the case of Canada, it wasn't actually clear, in Toronto in particular, it wasn't actually clear how much was foreign investor versus other investment vehicles and actors. So it didn't have quite the effect that was anticipated. But the City of Toronto recently regulated, very recently, last week, it was approved regulation of Airbnb, and it's going to have a huge impact because that, we know, has saturated, like I'm sure here in Amsterdam and so many cities, especially touristed cities. So those sorts of moves are really important.
And what is that new regulation with Airbnb in Toronto?
You can only, you have to be living in your home in order to put it on Airbnb. It's going to be, you have to register, et cetera, et cetera. It's like the same as in Barcelona.
Much more strict than it used to be.
But these are like ping, like that. This is not going to solve the problems that we're talking about that push reflects. What worries me are markets like New York and London, UK, because they are really driving the business model. Those are the financial centers of the world. And so we need to make sure that there's bigger action at state level, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think, please.
Before we go to the audience, I really would like to talk to them, but I would like to introduce the producer of the film and one of the cinematographers of the film, Margaret Jangod and Janice Davila. Janice is from Brazil, who's been filming around here. They're down there. You have to turn around and wave. Margaris from Chile and Sona from Korea, who also helped with this film. You can also say a short prayer.
And we're in fact running out of time because, as we know, in the festival, we have all these movies going on. So probably we can have a quick questions from the audience. If there is someone in your, yes, I see someone over there. Please stand up and raise your voice, if you don't mind. We don't have a mic. Yes, I'm pointing at you. And please keep it short. I translate or I will repeat it. I can. Yeah, because people, you say people have to pay your extra rent. Pay us rent, of course. Yeah.
It sounds really strange. It's hard for us to comment.
It's so complex.
It's hard for us to comment on the technicalities.
I mean,
what's the question?
Here's what I think the question is. It sounds to me like, I mean, I know that Holland has actually a pretty decent proportion of social housing, and the social housing providers are finding it hard to pay this tax, and therefore they're having to sell their units.
Yes.
And my answer to that is, at this point in our socioeconomic history around the world, governments should be doing everything they can to protect social housing and housing that's the most affordable. That's so obvious.
Another question, completely short question. Yes, over there. And you're the last one.
I've got a remark rather than a question. Thank you very much, Mr. Gertten, and for this fantastic documentary. In Holland, we have one big pension fund, which is the IDFA. If you're a civil servant in Holland, you're probably a pensioner because of that. The pension fund has recently signed up to the major UN, so-called UN Sustainability Development Goals, which is from your own organization. There are 17 UN Sustainability Development Goals. One of them, I think it's 11, is livable cities and affordable housing. I think it's for all stakeholders, like you mentioned, in the pension sector, to push your pension fund to sign up to these sustainable development goals, and that will drive the pension funds to invest with more sustainable Blackstones.
We only can agree with that, I guess. Yes. Thank you very much. Last question. There's someone with a good voice over there. Yes.
Yes, thank you very much. We are facing the German face of capitalism. That system, in this system, in another system, since the last century, we'll see that there's a gradual growth of social housing in reaction to it. We have been told the story that this combination can be stable, and now we see in the last 30 years social housing is being destroyed. Why not going to that, to him who for the first time described this process of gentrification very well, Fredrik Gertten in 1872? Why not making the conclusion, not regulating, modifying capitalism, but getting rid of it?
So, that's not a question. Thank you for your contribution. Last words are for you, of course, because you made the movie.
I'm happy that my film
Thank you.
makes people shout over a big theater with that strong voice. It's nice. I'm happy for that. Thank you very much.
I like to thank you.
One more thing. This film is has now a Dutch distributor, Cinema Delicatessen.
Yeah.
And I think if you will take one picture with your camera now and you tag it, push the film and see Delicatessen, then you can spread the word for the film so they can easier book it towards more people in the Netherlands. Because also if you want to show this film for your organization or your friends, you can tag that us or Delicatessen, because then we can create more talks like this. Because this film is creating a lot of local debates. So please use it. Please use the film.
And that's the great thing documentaries can do. And so we had a lot of conversation here on IDFA. I think it was about finding a new language and about creating awareness, and that's what we did also this morning. I'd like to thank you very much for coming to push this very important documentary. And before you leave the building, I ask you one more applause for the filmmakers.